The year is 1922. For months, the world has been captivated by the discovery of a lifetime. Archaeologists in Egypt have uncovered the tomb of the boy King Tut, and when they finally open the sarcophagus, they find that he's not actually a mummy, but a skeleton. Only 12 years old when he died around 3,000 years earlier. His skeleton looks like that of a typical child. Yet something about this discovery doesn't sit right with the team. Over the next few weeks, as more and more artifacts are removed from the tomb, some strange things start to happen. First, there's a series of earthquakes, and then someone is murdered. Then one of the excavators falls mysteriously ill and dies. Could these be mere coincidences, or is there really such a thing as a curse of the pharaohs? The idea of a curse of the pharaohs isn't a new one. In fact, it dates back to the 18th century BC, when the Egyptian ruler Akhenaten moved his empire's capital from Thebes to Ammon. There, he set out to establish a new religion centered around the sun god Aten, dropping the traditional worship of multiple gods for a more monotheistic approach. But this new religion wasn't popular, and once Akhenaten died, his successor reverted back to the old ways, and supposedly, that caused the spirits of the gods to turn against the royal family, dooming them to death. Over the next 150 years, every single member of Akhenaten's direct bloodline died violently, which led people to believe that the gods were cursing the royal family. But the modern conception of the curse of the pharaohs came over 3,000 years later when Napoleon invaded Egypt in 1798. During the invasion, French soldiers plundered many Egyptian tombs, desecrating the remains of pharaohs who had died thousands of years earlier. Soon after, Napoleon's soldiers began dying under mysterious circumstances, leading the French to believe that the pharaohs themselves were exacting their revenge, though in truth, they were probably victims of the plague. But this didn't stop the public from latching onto the story of a vengeful mummy's curse. In the decades that followed, several explorers and archaeologists died soon after discovering important Egyptian artifacts, and each time the press blamed it on a curse. The most famous case of this was in 1881 when a British explorer named Howard Weiss excavated the tomb of Ramses the Damned. Just as he entered the burial chamber, he lost his footing and fell, hitting his head so hard that he died instantly. The newspapers went wild with the story, claiming that Ramses' tomb was cursed, and though there was no actual evidence of a curse, the idea stuck around. So when Howard Carter discovered Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, the world was ready to believe that the curse of the pharaohs was real. On November 6, 1922, over a decade since he started searching for the lost tomb, Howard Carter stood before the entrance of a newly discovered burial chamber. He held up a small lantern, casting flickering light onto the walls covered in hieroglyphics. Next to him stood his mentor, Sir Flinders Petrie, as well as several other archaeologists and officials. They all knew what this meant. After years of searching, they had finally found the tomb of the infamous King Tut. Though when Carter first peered into the burial chamber, he didn't see a pharaoh. He saw a pile of rubble. So he moved aside some rocks, revealing a wooden box wrapped in chains and sealed with red wax. As the others watched intently, Carter carefully broke the seals and lifted the lid. Inside was another box made of ivory. He opened it, and inside that was a third box made of gold. This one was locked, so Carter used a small hammer to break it open. Finally, he could see what was inside, a human skeleton dressed in the finery fit for a king. At the time, Carter was disappointed that there wasn't a mummy, believing mummies to be much more interesting. Plus, he hoped to find the legendary headdress that adorned the face of many Egyptian pharaohs. But in the days that followed, it became clear why Tutankhamun hadn't been mummified. When scientists examined the skeleton, they realized that the boy king was only 12 or 13 when he died. He'd ruled over Egypt for almost a decade, from 1332 to 1323 BC. But his was a reign shrouded in mystery. Even before his tomb was discovered, historians knew very little about Tutankhamun, mostly because his reign coincided with that of his father, Akhenaten, who tried to erase any record of his son's rule. Historians believe that Tutankhamun's mother was Ankhesenomon, who may have married her father's vizier after Akhenaten's death, but the details of his life remain largely unknown. What we do know is that he died at a young age, and his tomb, located near the Valley of the Kings, is the smallest ever discovered. It was barely 10 feet deep and made of cheap materials, which indicated that his funeral was rushed. Many historians believe he died suddenly and unexpectedly, which would explain why the elaborate mummification rituals were never performed. Whatever the reason, the archaeologists now had a wealth of treasures to sift through. And as they did, strange things began to happen. The day after the tomb was opened, there was a magnitude 7.2 earthquake, and a week later, there was another, along with a magnitude 6.1 aftershock. By November, the Egyptian government was getting worried, fearing that the quakes would damage other nearby tombs. So they halted the excavations and sent in a team of engineers to study the situation. They determined that the earthquakes weren't dangerous, but it spooked the workers anyway. One even claimed that the ground had opened up to swallow the evil archaeologists who disturbed the pharaoh's rest, and many of the workers fled the site, refusing to return until the tomb was closed. But Carter pressed on, and on December, he uncovered a wooden box that turned out to contain the pharaoh's chariot. Then the following month, he found a funerary mask that had fallen off its pedestal and shattered on the floor. On February 1923, Carter discovered a human skeleton in the nearby workers' village. It was Lord Carnarvon's valet, who had died of a venomous snake bite. Soon after, Carter himself came down with a nasty case of malaria, and 2 months later, Lord Carnarvon died of a mosquito-borne illness. Again, just a few weeks after the discovery of the tomb, yet another worker was found dead, this time having been crushed to death by a falling object. With all of these strange deaths occurring so close to the excavation site, it seemed almost inevitable that someone would blame the curse of the pharaohs, and that someone was the press. Newspaper headlines blared about the mysterious deaths surrounding the excavation site, and soon, rumors were spreading about an actual curse. Of course, there was no evidence to support this claim. The deaths were either the result of natural causes or accidents, but the Egyptologist who had helped Carter discover the tomb, Archibald Douglas, believed otherwise. He was convinced that there was a curse on anyone who dared disturb the boy king's tomb. In fact, he believed that Carter himself was next, and if that happened, it would prove beyond a doubt that there really was a curse of the pharaohs. And in a letter to his friend, Douglas wrote, "I don't want to frighten you, but if he does die, we shall know that there is such a thing as an Egyptian curse. I am very sorry to say this, but I believe it will happen." But despite his concerns, Douglas continued to excavate the tomb alongside Carter, and while he lived to be 77 years old, he never forgot his fears. In fact, he spent his entire life studying ancient curses, and even wrote a book about the subject. As for Howard Carter, he was still haunted by the strange events that occurred after the tomb was opened. Too, in a letter to his friend, he wrote, "We have to remember that we are dealing with a period of time where anything and everything is possible." And he remained fascinated with Egyptian culture for the rest of his life. The story of the curse of King Tut continues to fascinate us today, and it is likely that we'll never know for sure whether there really is such a thing as a curse of the pharaohs. After all, the strange events that unfolded after the discovery of King Tut's tomb can be explained by more rational means. There were no deaths directly linked to the opening of the tomb itself, and most of the supposed curses struck down those connected with the excavation in ways that couldn't have been predicted beforehand. But, at the same time, there is something undeniably eerie about all of the strange events that took place after the discovery of the tomb. Do you think the curse of King Tut was real, or do you think it was just a legend? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and be sure to stay tuned for more videos like this one. Thanks for watching. Bye.